Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. My name is Betsy Wieseman. I'm the curator of Dutch and Flemish paintings here at the National Gallery, and I've had the wonderful privilege and very great pleasure of curating this exhibition on Dutch flowers. And one of the greatest pleasures in organizing this exhibition was the opportunity to work with the gentleman who's standing here, Brian Capstick. Brian and his wife Janice have collected over a number of years a wonderful collection of Dutch flower paintings of the 17th century. And he's very graciously put a number of these paintings on long-term loan to the gallery, and they are featured in this exhibition. And also very graciously, Brian has agreed to engage in conversation with me today so that I can grill him a bit about his collection, about the paintings in his collection, and share that information with you. And so I don't know how should we start.
Thank you, Betsy, for such a generous and charming introduction. Yes, I await the third degree at your hands. Yes.
I'll be kind. I'll be kind. And Brian and I, we don't like each other at all, by the way. Let me just set that out. Okay, my first question is pretty straightforward, and that is, when did you start collecting Dutch flower paintings and why?
Okay, well, I began collecting Dutch flower paintings about 25 years ago. Why is a slightly more complicated question. And I guess I wanted to make a collection of things that told a story, that had a narrative. And it could have been a narrative that began in 1880 with Impressionist paintings going through into the modern period, or it could have been a narrative, as this is, beginning in about 1605 and ending 120 years later. And as it turned out, I chose Dutch flower paintings.
So did you, you wanted to create a narrative, but had you been attracted to flowers or botany or horticulture prior to that? Was that a guiding reason?
I'm sorry to say it wasn't. No, this was entirely a matter of chance. I picked up a book by a guy called Lawrence Boll called The Bosschaert Dynasty. And this was long before I had any interest in collecting paintings, or indeed ever expected that I might one day be able to do so. So I read through this, and it told the story of how Dutch flower paintings in the 17th century began with this Bosschaert and carried on through to the Van Huysums that we see here today. So there we are, that's what kindled the interest.
And we have, I think from our own collection, not from yours, two paintings by Bosschaert in the exhibition, one of which is the large painting in the center on that wall, and then the one immediately to the left of it. What was the first painting that you bought? Do you remember?
I do, yes. Okay. My first painting wasn't one painting, it was two.
Ah.
And that was the pair of paintings by Beert, which sit next to...
Oh, fabulous.
Actually, my Bosschaert, which is on the right. Yeah. So I am going to take that away one day, Betsy.
Okay.
So, yes.
You may.
And if you can just look at those, they are actually very unusual paintings for their time, because most of the artists that were painting around that time did very meticulous renderings of exactly what you were looking at, and their aim was to be as true to life as possible. Beert didn't really attempt that. He thought, well, let's have a go. And you can sort of see a bit of impressionist appearance. It's those two paintings over there. And for me, that sort of struck a note, struck a chord. So that's where I began.
And maybe having, two in one purchase, that sort of already gave you a little bit of a collection,
It did, yes.
Yeah, got you started.
Yeah.
One of the things I particularly love about those Beert paintings is the fact that they still have survived as a pair, as a set, which is very unusual. And also the fact that with Beert, you see him starting to try and get a sense of three-dimensionality in the paintings by, focusing, highlighting the paintings in the front and shadowing the ones to either side. So there's a nice sense already in those paintings of how the genre is developing.
Yeah.
With those, I mean, what appealed to you about the Beert paintings was that sort of impressionistic quality, but what are the other qualities that you might look for in a particular painting?
Well, of course, the reason why this collection exists at all is to illustrate the development of the art as it went along through the 17th century. And I'm interested in the way things start, develop, and then finish, mainly for sort of biographical reasons. And in the beginning, the very early paintings are mainly sort of like illustrations almost of the various blooms, arranged in such a way as to look like they populate a vase, and they don't really have a three-dimensional component to any great degree. Whereas as the century went on, they got much better at it. So if you look at the Rachel Ruysch paintings on our left here, she was very adept at rendering these three dimensions, and that's one of the things that they achieved as they went along. So as your flower paintings develop over a century or so, it's almost like a science. They just get better at what they do, and that's interesting to me.
And that, I have to say, was one of the great joys when I first visited you in your home, to stand in a room and literally be in the middle of the history of 17th century Dutch flower painting. It was just an absolute delight, which I've tried to recreate here a little bit, thanks to paintings from your collection.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I've really enjoyed about having the opportunity to integrate works from your collection with ours is how they speak to each other, and how the works that you've lent to us amplify our own collection in really wonderful and dynamic ways. For example, this painting immediately to my side, I have a problem with left and right, is by Rahul Roush, as is the one next to it. This is from National Gallery's collection, and that one is from the Capstick collection. And just to be able to see how the artist develops over the course of her career between those two markers that we now have is really, really amazing. And I'm forever grateful.
Well, she was a very productive lady. She continued to paint until she was into her 80s, I believe.
And also just remarkable as a woman of the 17th century and early 18th century, because she was an independent artist. Although she was married, she went traveling throughout Europe and worked as a court painter.
Yes, in Germany, I think.
In Germany, which is unbelievable for the late 17th, early 18th century.
Ladies were a bit painted into a corner, you know, because they weren't allowed to paint the human figure, because they weren't allowed to go to the life class, because that might upset their sensibilities. So kind of still life painting was okay.
Yeah.
So that's why she would have chosen that.
No danger with flowers. Now, back on the list of questions here. Do you have a particular favorite painting in your collection?
Well, I suppose the one that we're standing in front of is probably everybody's favorite. And this is a most unusual painting. It was painted somewhere around the middle of the century, and you can see it is totally different, both in its conception and its execution, to pretty much all the others here. And if somebody said this is a 19th century painting and was painted in 1860, you wouldn't sort of suddenly turn around and say, no, that's impossible. So it's in an idiom and a style which is quite out of character with what led up to it and what followed after it. So it's an unusual painting.
It is. It's by Dirk de Bry, a Haarlem painter from a family of painters. I think his father and his brothers and his uncle were also painters. He himself painted primarily still lifes, and as a comparatively young man, entered a monastery, I believe, as a lay brother. A number of his paintings have a spiritual, have a Catholic dimension to them, but I think all of them have this wonderful almost spookiness to them because they are so immediate, so striking in their depiction. They always, in addition to 19th century Impressionist works, they also make me think of Spanish still lives in the starkness of it.
And the monumentality as well. I mean, the Spanish still life painters, many of them took the same sort of rather low point of view, and what you end up with is a much more massive appearance than you do if you take it higher up.
And also, I think one thing that appeals to viewers particularly about this painting is the informality of it. It's not, you know, a careful arrangement like, you know, the other, like Bosschaert or De Heem do. This is a bunch of flowers stuck in a vase, as you or I might do. You know, we go out into the garden and we pick whatever looks beautiful and in bloom. We come back and, you know, just sort of put them in the vase, and a few blossoms fall off, and a ladybird and a bumblebee have come in along with it. And we see that same wonderful immediacy in this painting.
Yeah. So I don't think he set out to paint in the tradition of anybody. I think he just wanted to paint a flower picture, and here it is. And I think the Debray family painted all sorts, didn't they? They did portraits and what have you.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful, diverse artistic dynasty. But
and I came by this picture by accident, you know.
I never have accidents like this.
Well, it wasn't that much of an accident, but the then director, this was some years ago, of the Rijksmuseum, was having dinner with a friend of mine who told him that she had this friend who you know, collected flower paintings. Oh, he said, he should go and have a look at this Debray. So the word got back to me that this was the case, and then I did, and so here it is. So that could very easily have been part of somebody else's collection. But
you could have begged off that dinner party, and you know, somebody else would have had the painting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you didn't.
Yes, it's much sought after.
Now, we've talked about a particular favorite in your collection. Do you have a particular favorite painting in the National Gallery's collection that...
Oh gosh, that I would sort of make off with. Well, perhaps we can do a swap. Well, I think possibly this Valskapelle here on my right. This is a wonderful painting by him. It's, I think, the most complicated painting that I've seen of his. And you can see these wonderful sort of arabesques, these fabulous colours. And I think I'm right in saying that he was a tutor to Rachel Ruysch, wasn't he?
I think so, yeah.
I believe so, yeah. He was her tutor, in fact.
Well, it's, you know, it's interesting that you pick that painting as the one which, I'm sorry, I can't allow you to take away with you, because it's actually thanks to you and the loan of the paintings occasioning this exhibition that we took a second look at that painting. And prior to the planning for this exhibition, the painting had been obscured really by a very discolored varnish. The painting itself is in absolutely superb state, but we were looking at the painting, and also our framer came up with this amazing 17th century tortoiseshell frame. And he said, look, I've got this great frame. Do you have a painting that this might fit? And I said, well, we have this flower still life, and we tried it. And I said, you know, that frame makes the painting look kind of dingy. So Morwenna Blewett, who's one of our restorers, did a beautiful cleaning of this painting, and she said it was so easy. There was absolutely nothing to do. That was just, you know, dirty varnish. So, Brian, thanks to you, the National Gallery has a whole new painting, I think.
Thank you very much.
And that
it's a great one.
Yeah, is I think one of my favorites too to look at because of all the little insects crawling in and out. Which is just amazing, particularly at the lower left-hand corner of the arrangement. You can see a caterpillar dangling from its bit of silk, which is just extraordinarily the fineness of that artistic detail. I like these paintings too. Yeah.
And I think you'd agree that they do show to advantage by being exhibited alongside others of the same genre. You get more out of them individually because they're in a crowd than you do if there was just one amongst
just like the bouquet of flowers itself.
Exactly, yes, yes, exactly.
As you've formed a collection over 25 years or so, has your understanding of the field of Dutch flower painting changed, evolved? Do you think differently about it now than you did a couple of decades ago?
Well, it's certainly evolved, because of course as you collect, you study, and as you study, you learn more, at least if you can remember it. So, yeah, I know a lot more about it than I did when I began. I think that's fair to say. What I do think about is many people now collect modern paintings. Contemporary sort of seems to rule the world. So you have to ask yourself, well, what is the role of Dutch flower paintings? What's its relevance to the modern viewer? And that's quite an interesting question. I don't know if you feel disposed to answer it, Betsy.
Well, it's been interesting to me because, you know, when I proposed doing this exhibition here, I thought, well, you know, it'll appeal to some people. But what's really surprised me is how amazingly popular the show has been. And if any of you have been here more than once, you know almost any time you come in, it's massively crowded in here, which is fantastic. We love that. But what's also interested me is the range of people who visit the show and are interested in it. You know, people who are primarily interested in gardening or from a scientific point of view, or younger people who come in and sometimes, I think, despite themselves, find themselves intrigued by these paintings and, you know, just pinpointing the bumblebee, the ladybird, anything, but they realize that there is something of interest in old paintings. And one project that we did recently, they did an amazing reproduction in flowers of the large Bosschaert painting outside on Trafalgar Square. And I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see that, but that was, from my perspective, a really wonderful way of expressing the beauty of these paintings in a very visceral sense. And I think that inspired a lot of people who might not ordinarily have done so to come in and have a look at the paintings themselves. So I think these paintings continue to be very relevant to viewers today, and in some respects perhaps more so than subject pictures. You know, you don't have to know biblical history or mythology or obscure allegories to be able to fall in love with these.
No, that's true. And also I think that they do sort of technically meet modern painting to a greater degree than you might at first think. Because of course, even the most abstract of modern paintings, let's take a Bridget Riley for example, is just an arrangement of colours and shapes to create a particular effect. And all the colours and shapes in these flower paintings are of course not accidental. The artist has thought about them. And the shapes too are something which have been carefully arranged to create an effect. So,
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that I think people are only aware of subliminally, is how the artists manipulate color and shape and form to really pull the arrangement together. And one painting that I always think of is your painting by Rahul Roush, which has this, these markers, if you will, of a beautiful salmon pink. And you see touches of it throughout, and even down here in the honeysuckle. She's brought in touches of that pink to unite that with the rest of the composition. I mean, it's subtle, but it's absolutely beautiful. And so I think those sorts of formal lessons are something that people can take away as well.
Yeah. And that very painting used to hang in a room which was next to a room which had a big Bridget Riley painting in it. And it was actually quite instructive to sort of look at these two together and sort of turn over in your mind how much things had changed, and yet also how little things had changed. So it's, that interested me.
So we're going to have to add a Bridget Riley to our collection.
I think you should, yes.
Okay. Thank you all very much for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it. And thank you, Brian.
May I say a big thank you to Betsy and her colleagues here at the National Gallery for mounting this exhibition. I think it's a perfect size and it does as good a job as anybody could do of telling the story of flower painting over this period. So congratulations and thank you to you and your team.